of you on the panel. Good evening, all of you. Professor Irene, Dr. Kshitij Singh, dear participant, dear my colleagues, and all those who are participating from different part of the country. It's a great privilege for me to welcome all of you in this afternoon. And the topic for our discussion in this afternoon is very important and very interesting one. That it's an introductory part, introduction to GI and international and comparative perspective, where we have one of the best speaker on this topic, Professor Irene Calboli, who is joining us live from Singapore. Professor Irene Calboli, as you know by now, she's a professor of Texas A&M University School of Law, and she is also a fellow at the Transatlantic Technology Law Forum at Stanford Law School. She has been visiting professor of many top-notch university. Currently, she is visiting professor at Nanyang Business School, Singapore, and she is also a distinguished fellow at the Royal University of Law and Economics in Cambodia. Irene has been a prolific scholar and author, and she has edited several books, articles, book chapters. Her current publication focus on overlapping intellectual property protection, trademark, and geographical indications of origin, and the intersection between intellectual property and international trade. She has written many books on GI per se. One of the book, recently edited book of her, GI at the Crossroad of Trade, Development and Culture, which is an open access book published by Cambridge Publication, which you can download the copy freely available on internet. She has also been a Fulbright specialist by the Fulbright Commission of US during the period 2017 to 20. So without taking much time, I welcome you, Irene. We have another panelist with us, Dr. Kshitij Singh, who is my colleague and a friend of mine in the Campus Law Center, Delhi University, who has been into IPR for a very long time by now, and who has also authored books on biotechnology and law and other areas he is working on. So I welcome you too, sir. So before we begin, Irene, I'm giving a little insight on the topic, as you have already explained the outline of your presentation. So GI, as we are going to talk about, the question comes, what's in the name? And the answer these days has a lot to do with where the name originates, because to the owner of GI, names have everything to do with the product's premium. I understand you are going to explain the concept of GI, how it has been defined in the TRIPS agreement and another different international conventions. But until the TRIPS agreement, protection was mainly based on Paris Convention and its special agreement, that is the Madrid Agreement 1891 and the Lisbon Agreement 1958. Recently, the Geneva Act of Lisbon Agreement on Appellation of Origin has also been brought into effect by WIPO. Now, this Geneva Act allows international registration of GI in addition to Appellation of Origin and permits the accession to the Lisbon Agreement by certain international intergovernment organizations. So again, this is going to open new vista for already globally marketed products such as Scotch whiskey, Darjeeling tea, or for that matter, basmati rice, which are the prominent GIs from the region also. Certain issues, I believe, which we are going to discuss in this presentation, that what is the traditional rationale for the protection of GI, or how GIs were protected pre and post TRIPS agreement. Now, what are the socio-economic functions of GI? It is also very important, considering a developing country like India, what role GI can play in the socio-economic development of the country, and what are the cost and benefits of the protection of GI from the developing countries' perspective. I understand Irene is basically from Europe, from Italy, but she has done extensive work as far as GI is concerned from the developing countries' point of view also. So I believe she would also be dwelling on this aspect. So without taking much time, Irene, I hand over the podium to you, please.
So good afternoon, and thank you, everybody. Thank you to your colleagues, to all the students who are listening. It is my very pleasure to be talking to you. India, it's very important, not only for geographic indication, but I think for intellectual property in general. And most importantly for me, India is the home of very many dear friends I am very honored to be working with several of the faculties at your universities and across India. And I constantly learn from your beautiful countries, not just geographic indication, but so many other areas. So I hope to visit you in person also soon. I also want to extend my wishes, because I know right now, not only we are all living, this very extraordinary time with COVID-19, but right now, India is suffering from, a fairly major storm. And so I hope all of you are safe, your families are safe. And, let's keep being resilient. Eventually, we will all be fine. But I really hope all of you now are safe and you're very much in my thoughts. I was asked to talk about the topic that it's really important in my research agenda, and I think it's important in general now in intellectual property studies. In fact, I think this is one of the topics that, despite effort to keep it a bit as a Cinderella of intellectual property, is coming back and back and back, and is now really becoming a topic of major discussion, not only nationally, but internationally and regionally. The topic of geographic indication was addressed in this book. I don't want to do self-promotion, but I think some of you might be interested in this book because it's a quite well done book. I would say it might already need some revision because this field is so fast growing. But this is probably the latest and still one of the most comprehensive collection of materials for geographic indication focusing on Asia Pacific. There is a chapter by Yogesh Pai on India. And again, it was 2.5+ years ago, so there is many changes, many more geographic indications that have been registered in India. But the other thing about this book is open access, so you can download it 100% for free from the Cambridge website. So I think it's a useful resource. This is also a useful resource. It doesn't focus on India, but as you know, the European Union is doing a lot of work across the world, and this is an interesting collection of the laws and some case studies from the ASEAN region that, which has been made by the IPT project with the RISE project. These are two of the new projects by the European Union. And of course, the European Union has an agenda on GIs. They want to promote the European GIs. That doesn't take away anything from the fact that GIs do remain an important tool for local development, national, local, rural, and agricultural development, and they can function well, in the European Union. They can function well in India. They can function well in Indonesia, and so I think these are, it's interesting work done on this area. And this is a book, also, all these are free to download. This is another publication that look a lot at the economic case studies, but with a lot of economics by the FAO, and tries to ties geographic indication with food and sustainable development. And here again, you see the influence and the important role that the European institution, this one at subsidies by the European Bank, are again for agricultural policies. And of course, there are lots of economic interests related to that. That's not secret, but we know how important are Indian GIs, not just for India, but also for Indian exports, Darjeeling tea, and many others at this point, basmati rice and so on. So what are geographical indication of origin? Well, as you, I'm sure know, geographic indication are, as the name themselves say, are geographical names that indicate a certain product as coming from a specific geographical region. And here is also what it's the specification about geographic indication. GIs indicate both origin and a certain set of specific qualities that goes with that specific origin. So here you have 3 products. So I'm going to show you many Indian products too, but these I would say are in many ways quintessential early on geographical indication, and also appellation of origin, Parmigiano Reggiano, Prosciutto di Parma. They're both Italian, so I'm going to do a bit of promotion. And Champagne. These are probably some of the oldest geographic indications. The terminology, as your professor has said, it's threefold. We talk about indication of source, and this is the terminology that is used in the Paris Convention and also in the Madrid Agreement that protects the vine. So we will also discuss how geographic indication really, the concept comes from the protection of wine. Dev Ganji, which is also, you know, a child of India, now teaching in Oxford and is a dear friend, has done very interesting research on geographic indication, as pioneer in many ways, lots of the research in this area as well. And recently has also published about the real influence of the wine industry, the French wine laws on the whole development of geographical indication as we know it today. And how we come from wine, and then now we've extended this protection and this concept so much beyond wine. Then the second definition is appellation of origin, that comes from the French laws, again, the French law for protecting wine originally. And then geographical indication is the third and the most global definition that has been exported across the world by the TRIPS agreement, as we will soon see. And now the Geneva Act of the Lisbon Agreement, signed in 2015, extend the protection originally reserved to appellation of origin under the Lisbon Agreement also to GIs under the chapter of the Geneva Act. What's really important is that the Geneva Act was finally, did enter into force just a couple of months ago after the European Union signed it, and that was in November 2019. So enough countries now we're going to see that specifically have signed and ratified the Geneva Act of the Lisbon Agreement. And so that now is into force. And it will be very interesting to see to what extent the Geneva Act can really become a game changer in the international registration of GIs. So the definition, I've been written extensively on the definition. I don't want to extend too much my remarks here. But I think what's important in geographic indication definition to a bit, it's the changes in the definition. So here, if I use the pointer, WIPO doesn't have a legal definition of GIs because there is the definition now in the Geneva Act, there is a definition, but that really cut and paste the definition in TRIPS. The definition in WIPO was that of appellation of origin. The TRIPS agreement defines GIs as indication which identify a good. So under the international standard, we apply protection to goods, not to services at this point. Country can choose to protect services as well. You know, Swiss financial services, for example, or Thai massages, but that's not an internationally mandated requirement. So identify a good as originating in the territory of a member or a region or locality in that territory where a given quality, comma, reputation, or other characteristic of the good is essentially attributed to its geographical origin. This definition has been criticized for being a bit lax because you can even use history rather than through geography. You can have Banarasi silk made with silk worms and silk plantation that are really not located in Banarasi unless the specification of Banarasi specify that everything should come from the region, because the reputation of the region, and as long some part of the product is made in the region, still qualify under the TRIPS agreement definition. And so this has been one of the real issues in the international debate about, well, is geographical accurate or not? Because if it can just be reputation rather than actual location of all the manufacturing and all the ingredients, you see there can be room for critique, and also room for saying, why should somebody be entitled to use a name for something that is not 100% made there? So these are still a bit open questions that remain. But it's certain that a geographic indication is a name that identifies a very strong link between the terroir, the territory, and the actual quality and characteristic of the product. So some examples, just to start, I think visually is important to have example. Roquefort cheese from Roquefort village in France, Parma ham, prosciutto di Parma, that come from the region of Parma, which is a city in Italy. These are just some of the current geographic indications that are protected in India. And so you see India protects handicraft, protects natural products, protects spices, potteries. These are more geographic indication from India. The Darjeeling tea, of course, was is probably one of the most famous, was the very first. Has a very strong tea board that protects and enforces the protection of Darjeeling teas. Darjeeling is also registered in the European Union under the European Union system for geographic indication. But here you see, just more examples. These were, of course, they are outdated now. We have many more, but I just wanted to show you some examples. Now, coming from Italy, Italy is the country in the European Union with the highest number of registration. Now, let me also say the number of registration doesn't necessarily mean much in terms of, if we look at the development, agricultural development, you don't need to do a run to get, 1,000 GIs. You want to have good GIs, and even in Italy that has today registered almost 1,000 GIs, those who are actually exported and really profitable are just a handful of those. But certainly, geographic indications are a governance tool for many local community, even small community. And so Italy has many, many, many geographic indications for cheeses, for wine, for all sorts of products, transformed products, and so on. This is my region. I come from Bologna in Italy, which is known for, the oldest university in the Western world, but also for being one of the capital of food, the gastronomic capital in the world. And so here you have the product that come from this specific region. A lot of food, a lot of wines, oil, and many, many more. And so, of course, because Italy and because India and because, say, Indonesia, and these are countries that have a very strong agricultural production, manufacturing of handicraft production, traditional products. These are very important for our economy, and both at local production and local consumption, but also in terms of international trade and or national trade or European trade or Asian trade and so on. And I think that's why it's important also to understand not all products are equal. Some are more versatile, more famous, better marketed. Some are just more useful. When we compare pepper is a spice that can be used in any cuisine, while other type of GI, say fish sauce, or a bit more peculiar geographic indication, they might not be as popular just because they might be used by less people across the world, and so they're less adaptable. That's something also that we have to consider. This is Spain. Spain also has many geographic indications. Queso manchego might be the most famous, but Rioja for wine, and they have many more. I didn't want to put too many European GIs, but I think that's, one of the value of this type of presentation is really to show comparative resources for you all. And hopefully all of us can travel back soon, so all of us can enjoy each other countries soon. But in the meantime, perhaps we can just have a little taste. Every time I drink my Darjeeling tea, and I drink it more or less every day, or I drink coffees from across the world, or I eat a sweet from another country. Even if I'm stuck at home, I'm still traveling, and I'm still appreciating, the cultures and the beautiful, so many beautiful things across the world by my many colleagues and friends. So, this is important so much beyond just trade. This is important for culture. This is important for international understanding and appreciation of each other's culture, international respect as well, I would say, in a world that now needs a lot more international respect and peace, because we are a bit on a rocky times, I would say, for international relations, but people can be better. And so hopefully, geographic indication could make us closer in many ways. These are Indonesian examples of GIs. Indonesia is a big country, not as big as India, but certainly it's a relevant player in international trade, more and more so. And these are coffee from Bali, Kintamani coffee, coffee from Sumatra, Gayo coffee, rice, and also tobacco, for example, for cigars, and some vegetables. This is Thailand. Thailand has famous silk as well, famous coffees, famous teas. Geographic indication are a very important tool for development in Thailand, and the Thai IP office, like the Indian IP office, take geographic indication very seriously. I do considerable amount of work in Cambodia, and these are two of the three products that are now registered in Cambodia. One is Kampot pepper, and one is Campeospeus palm sugar. And this is really interesting to me, because while Kampot pepper is really a very successful GI, because it's one of the best pepper in the world because of the quality, the palm sugar is less, is still a good product, but is less sold across the world, just because pepper, as I mentioned earlier, is just a more versatile spice. And now I think whether it's pepper from Cambodia, pepper from Malaysia, pepper from Africa, pepper from India, we are more careful about origin on things that we might like, coffee, tea, pepper, chocolate. These are winning products because everybody in the world uses them widely. Palm sugar becomes more a niche products. And so this is also, sometimes the community behind these GIs don't understand why is this other one getting more profit than my community. It's just because the product is different. It's not the same product. It's a product that might have a lower number of people who are interested by that specific product. When you sell silk as a textile, you might sell on a wider basis than if you sell silk already as a sari, just because more women in the world might want the silk to just cut it depending on their national fashion, even though it's imported silk, then actually, not the same number of women in the world might dress with a sari, just because that might not be their culture. And so, so the textile might be easier to export and become a more profitable type of export with a specific motif, Sahari types of silk, Indian silk, batik from Indonesia, for example, than an already designed type of clothing might not be used so widely, for example. And so I think all these are not GI consideration, these are marketing consideration of a specific GI product. And why do I mention that? It's because these are products from Japan. I mention that because when we think about GIs, the public policy, we're going to see that in a minute, is very much using GIs by the government as a promotion tool for a certain sector of the economy. So now that we have seen some examples, I think also it's relevant in the definition to see sometimes geographical name is the whole country, Colombian coffee, maybe a region of a country, maybe a village, might be a specific place, which is really not a village nor a city, but is, for example, Parmigiano Reggiano, it's a place that is in between Parma and Reggio Emilia, both of those being cities. While Parma is a city and is the the area in across the province of the city. So this is how we define geography and we define location. Geographic indication are still a quite problematic debate because some names are the same across the world because we had a lot of immigration, and so people leaving the old world and going to the new world carry with them things such as the name of the region and the products as well. So Italian immigrants left Italy, and now you have Italian everywhere. You have a lot of Italians across the world. And so my usual example is people from Naples were making pizza, and now then they brought it to the United States. Then in fairness, is the United States that made pizza famous across the world, but still it's Italian pizza, even though it's adapted to many countries. And so lasagna, pizza, think about tandoori or dal that is made by Indian immigrants that now live in England or live in the United States. By the way, Indian food is my second favorite food after Italian food. And I should say Indian food in India is much better than Indian food in most places. Singapore is okay Indian food because it has real Indian that are living here, but even that is not even remotely as good as Indian food in India. So I think, these considerations are relevant, but for the countries that are the new country, then their argument is, well, my people are have the same right because they do the same thing to call it, and so that name has become a generic name. There is more than culture attached to this generic name. There is a big money interest. We will see in a minute, a lot of the current discussion are between Europe and many of the countries. Europe is also negotiating an FTA with India. I don't think GIs are really one of the hot issue between the two countries because the two countries agree on GIs, but one of the hot issue might be for India to recognize some of these cheese name that might be considered generic, not so much for India internal production, because India doesn't really produce much cheese or much dairy beyond, paneer and so on, but it's for the Australian, the New Zealand, the dairy, the big American dairy manufacturer that want to use the generic name, such as Asiago, Fontina, and name that the Europeans say, no, these are GIs, and these others say, no, these are generic, because if India recognizes these as European GIs, suddenly the Australian, the New Zealanders have to rebrand their generic now products, and they can't sell them in India, and that's a huge market. And so this is really why we have, this is really a debated, very hotly debated. It's about market access, it's about international trade and money interest. That's really what the debate is about, to be honest. Then it might become a cultural debate, but for now, I would say to a large extent, the real main debate is really about market access by countries, and the alcohol debate about wines to a large extent has been resolved with international agreement and bilateral agreement between the EU and many of the other countries that have interest in alcoholic beverages. But the cheese debate, the dairy related debate is still raging on, and that's really one of the main issues. Then you have specific GIs issues across the world, but the real big market right now, I would say, is about dairy products primarily. But as I mentioned, from a policy development standpoint, geographic indication have a very, very important role in public policy. And that depends on, countries, how big agricultural countries, agricultural interest country have, and many countries do have agricultural interests. So geographical indication, as we will see, trademarks can as well, they indicate the name of the product. And the name encapsulates information about the geographical origin and about the quality. So the terroir, as I said before, remains the #1 link between that name, origin, and characteristics. And as all intellectual property, then the effect of GI registration is the granting to the holder of the GI the right to exclude other from using. Now, this exclusion doesn't necessarily translate in market success. Some GIs there is a post-registration phase of marketing, quality control, and so on that is crucial, but these GIs are all sorts of intellectual property, grant the right to exclude. That can also be transformed in a marketing tool. Because geographic indication have a public policy aspect, they become, as mentioned, very important tool for agriculture and local development. They can promote local and rural development. They can promote niche market products, usually for higher quality products. Certainly a Banarasi silk or Darjeeling tea are better quality products than generic products, for example. Not always, but many times. They also link investment to regions, and so they become, companies have to stay there, or they have to go there if they want to use the name, which gives them a competitive advantage through the right to exclude. And so these are important considerations. In addition, I would also argue that GI incentivizes competition in non-GI markets and in GI markets. So I think there is a very positive economic benefit of GIs about raising the quality of products, and so competitors have to be better than so it's basically it's the opposite of the American style terrible food. It's not the race to fast food, but it's the race to better and more sustainable food. In fact, now GIs are heavily linked to sustainable development as well. But certainly GI provide exclusive right, and exclusive right provide value. They can provide values. This is the legal framework that we need to protect geographical indications. So we need to have a actual legal recognized system. This can come from the international system. They can come in Europe, came from bottom up. In many countries, come from trips down. And then, registration or a system of protection. Registration is advisable because it creates a paperwork trail, and also it's can also create property rights on it, and is actually a useful tool to have for recognition in terms of even evidence of it. Then we need to have market recognition and marketing. We need to have that for actually a successful product. And we need to have quality control. Enforcement of quality control are crucial. And we need to have a system of enforcement against fake products and products who take advantage of the name against the law. Remember that an intellectual property system needs the substantive provision, but then needs enforcement, because without enforcement, it doesn't matter if you have the provision if we can't actually have the respect of this provision. So I'm not advocating for strong enforcement. There is a lot of debates about criminal enforcement, and I think that sometimes we got to an excessive situation, but it's certainly relevant to have a working enforcement system where the holder of a GI can actually get the rights protected against those who take advantage unlawfully of those. Otherwise, there's no point in having protection. And that's crucial for consumers as well. Now, there are a series of challenges for geographic indication. you know, when you have a lot of success, then you have higher demand, and that can create pressures in the market terms of quantity, and that can create quality problem. That's also why the definition in TRIPS, it's a bit more relaxed, so we can get technically ingredients from outside, so then that can increase the quantity, but still the specification does remain crucial to see how we create a GI that can be proper and function properly in the market, because quality control is crucial for long-term sustainability of the success of a product. You can't produce too much too fast, because you will dilute the quality, and in the long term that will destroy your product. And so that's something to really remember when many, you know, I'm advising often, always pro bono, you know, several community, and there is sometimes a rush to profit, and that's not the key. Certainly we want to have tools for development, and development needs to be growth in terms of you know, quality, in terms of quality of life, in terms of higher wages, in terms of the community needs to benefit, so needs to profit. But that's different than trying to push this profit too fast by making the product less good to increase the quantity, because that's not going to be sustainable. The products will not be able to continue to keep the competitive advantage if we dilute the quality. Remember, that's really crucial. And that's also why regulation and who is investing in the product. I think one of the very important issue here is when you look at the ecosystem of Europe, France, Italy, Spain, these are countries, I would say India, these are countries that have a long tradition of agriculture, of many handicraft, and so the GI now often is a system to regularize, organize the community, but it's not just a system that comes from top down. I would say perhaps in India right now, the government, local government, regional government use this system a bit more top down, but certainly to have a long-term strategy of success, you need to have a real culture of quality of your products. And otherwise it's not sustainable. And so that really show why, you know, certain wines might be GI now, but they've been in the world forever. Certain cheese, certain food have been in the world forever. And that what's make them long-term success stories, rather than a little blip, but then, you know, something that is, we are going to say, oh, well, you know, but the quality is not really good, is overpriced, is not something. So I think that's where geographic indication need to keep being faithful to the message of good products, good quality, good ambassadors for the region, the locality they actually advertise with their names. Here you have a table of the international agreements that are relevant. So these are the international legal instruments that are relevant for the geographic indication, the treatment of GIs. We start from the Paris Convention that indicates protection for indication of origin, but not necessarily just geographical origin, to the Madrid Agreement that protects the vine, the actual plants of wine, so the grapes, to the Lisbon Agreement that create protection for appellation of origin, to a French-style enhanced protection, and then to TRIPS that really brings this protection to a very large scale, and then to the Geneva Act of the Lisbon Agreement that now tries to merge the Lisbon system with the TRIPS definition and create an additional registration system for GIs in addition to appellation of origin. So I don't want to go too much into the technicalities of all these agreements, because this is law that you all can read. But I think, again, the Paris Convention, Article 10 and 10 bis encapsulate the provision that protects against unfair competition, primarily of any indication of origin. But the story of GIs does start in France, and does start with the wine law of 1905. This was really how this journey started, because in 1905, a law that wanted to protect appellation for wine was adopted, and that was the result of a lot of adulterate wine and diluted wine that were in the market, because there was a pest that destroyed most of the French winery. There was a parasite called phylloxera, and because of that, many wineries were destroyed, and so wine was less, there were less grapes available, and so wine was more difficult to make, and so we start to see counterfeited products, products that were adulterated with more water and were not faithful to their label. And to avoid that, the French authorities enacted a wine law that for the first time introduced the concept of appellation of origin. And the reason was fraud control. And there was the link between a certain name and geographical origin rather than, in order to avoid consumer fraud. This law was then renewed in 1919, and in 1935, an additional law was passed that created the concept of control appellation of origin, where there was the link between the name, the actual origin, and the specific characteristics. And I think that's really is the origin of the concept of geographic indication as we know it today. Then, the French system also created a control body, the INAO, the Institut National for Appellation d'Origine, so the National Institute for Appellation of Origin, that is a public-private partnership between government and private initiatives to actually control the quality of appellation of origin. In 1990, under the French law, the concept of a geographical indication, appellation of origin for wine, was extended to all agricultural products. And 1992 is when the first regulation for geographical indication was adopted for foodstuff in the European Union. Now has a different date because it's been amended, but this was really the push for 1994 TRIPS agreement adoption of Article 22, 23, and 24. The European were behind this provision, and in Europe, the European legislation is vastly based on the French law. Even before the French law were pushed through and became a European regulation, these laws were also being implemented. Similar laws that were coming from the French example had been implemented in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, in many countries in Europe had already. And even now, I would say the French example does remain the matrix for a lot of these provision. So from France to Europe, from Europe to TRIPS to the world, I would say, in many ways. I know the Americans don't like if I say that, but that's true. And that's really where the story comes from. And personally, I would say for a good reason, because products on GIs are better products. And it doesn't matter whether we like France or not. I think these specific child of the French diplomacy has been benefiting a lot of countries across the world, not just for wines and cheese, but for teas and coffees and chocolate and silks. And so that's a positive result. Now, from the French appellation of origin laws, the first international agreement, child of the very first push of the French diplomacy, was the Lisbon Agreement, WIPO 1958. This was an agreement that created also a registration system. It's today administered by WIPO for the registration or appellation of origin. The limit of this agreement is the protection is very high, so the membership is very low. You have only 30 member states and 2 just joined. because they joined both Geneva Act and Lisbon system at the same time. And so you see, India, for example, is not a member because the system is fairly complex and the protection is very high. In a nutshell, there is protection that is what we would call enhanced protection, so TRIP plus, TRIPS 23. Appellation of origin are protected against usurpation and imitation, not just against confusion. Appellation of origin cannot become generic. And once registered, they are automatically recognized in every member of the Lisbon Union. So you can have, at this point, the Lisbon system, you can only register through the WIPO system. Once you apply and enact both the Geneva Act and the Appellation of and the Lisbon system, then we can also have, the direct route, through application to the various regional and national offices, which is a bit similar to the trademark system that we have at WIPO. So here you have provision of the Lisbon Agreement. I'm not going to focus on this specifically. One of the things that is important is, again, the protection is against usurpation. So FETA type cheese, it's not allowed under the Lisbon system, or Dutch style Gouda. All these, even though you clearly know that this is not original Gouda from Holland, this is not original Feta from Greece, these are forbidden because they evocate, even though there is the localizer, the actual name of the geographical indication. And appellation of origin cannot become generic, and the genericness is champagne generic, is Feta generic. That's really the main issue. When a country uses a name generically, even though it's a geographic indication somewhere else, even under TRIPS, that name cannot be forced upon the country that's generic. Then the country can decide, well, that name is no longer generic, but it does remain really important to, I see that there is an hand raised. If anybody has a question, shall I respond now?
Let's take the question at the end only, Irene. I think. At
the end, okay.
Okay.
And can you tell me until what time do you want me to talk?
You have another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay. So, and the other thing I want to mention, you see the Lisbon system is really heavily utilized by Europe and France. And the type of products that are heavily registered, no surprise here, wines and spirits. And you will also, that really makes us understand why TRIPS has enhanced protection for wines and spirits. Is because this is an area where not only the French and the Italian have very important interest, is Scotch whiskey, it's California wine, is Tasmania, Australia, and New Zealand wine, and so there is Japanese whiskey. It's a club. I would say, the Wines and Spirit Club is a club where also those who could not agree on geographic indication in general would agree they all had a lot of interest at stake. And so this is really why you see economically we had a very big differentiation between wine, spirit, and other products. And so then you see that translated into a differentiated system, even internationally under TRIPS. So these are just examples of the Lisbon registration. You have the slides, and so you are, you can then see the things that we don't have time to discuss. TRIPS, as I just said, creates two levels of protection. One is all GIs, and one is the wines and spirit. The wines and spirit get Lisbon type protection with some exceptions, while all GI gets unfair competition type of protection. TRIPS does not impose, however, how GIs are protected. So member states can register GI through the trademark system, and some do, but there is a difference between the two. Public law enforcement is far more strong through a sui generis system. So both GIs and trademarks are vehicle to provide consumer information about the quality and the origin of the product, but certainly there are relevant differences between the two systems. And the most relevant difference is truly administrative enforcement. Under a sui generis system, there is a state mandatory requirement for public enforcement, while the trademark system has to rely on private initiative unless we have counterfeited products, so it means fake products. And while under the sui generis system, certainly GIs do enjoy stronger protection from an enforcement standpoint. This is a bit how the world is divided. The yellow sui generis, the green is certification marks. In reality, for example, both the United States and Australia have sui generis system and so New Zealand for wines. And then when we look at the value and the numbers of GIs for wine, that means that, you know, this system are probably hybrid. They should better be defined as hybrid. TRIPS includes a lot of exceptions. Generic terms are exceptions. And so here you have you know, a lot of the contested name now across the world. You know, is FETA generic? FETA is a European geographic indication, but is generic, you know, in many other countries. Is Asiago, is Parmesan, are these generic terms? And, you know, if suddenly the answer is no, means that nobody will be able to produce this product under a generic name and sell them into markets where these are not protected as GIs. These are non-protected as GIs in many countries. They are protected as GIs in Europe and in some other countries. So this is, you know, these remain, you know, the issue in terms of dairy products. Homonymous GIs, so Rioja, Argentina, Rioja, Spain are both protected. So we can find a localizer differentiation under the TRIPS agreement as well. And TRIPS provides for built-in agenda. So that provides for more negotiations to be carried on, even though we know that was 1994, we are 2020, 25 years of TRIPS, no new negotiation, no new provision on GIs have been adopted. You know, lots of debate. For example, you know, the Europeans say the Americans should not be able to use the word champagne in any way, even though now champagne has been clawed back. The word champagne is no longer generic, but American champagne, California champagne can still be used, so it's becoming semi-generic. When the localizer is used, the word can still be used, and the French don't want that either. They just want it to be called sparkling wine, not to be called champagne. There have been bilateral agreements between the European Union and many countries with respect to names of wine. They're called the Wines Agreement. These have interested, and so now in many of these countries that have agreed to these wines agreements, 16 names of wine, champagne, you know, Chablis, Burgundy, and so on, they have been clawed back. And so these countries no longer can use this name generically. Now there is a big fight, for example, between Europe and Australia related to the name Prosecco, because Prosecco is a GI now from Italy, and there is an enormous amount of money in Prosecco because it's a sparkling wine which is cheaper than champagne, but it can really be a substitute, and so it's been one of the most successful sparkling wine and wine from Europe recently, and so there again you start to see issues about name in this respect. But as I mentioned before, GIs are very much a trade conflict issue. Budvar, it's the GIs from the Czech Republic. Budweiser is the registered trademark by Anheuser-Busch. And so they, they're fighting across the world, but Budweiser cannot sell in the United States, so it has to be sold as Czech bar. But interestingly, the Anheuser-Busch distributors in the United States distribute Czech bar as well. So because they have the network, and so in that one, while we fight legally over who uses the name, we make profit together through a distribution chain, just because it makes more sense for everybody. So, you see some of these are interesting discussion. This is another example. I mentioned to you before, FETA is a generic term in the United States. Well, in France is really the origin of GI protection. However, Président, which is a French company, makes FETA in the United States. A French company cannot make FETA in Europe because there is a European GIs, but they can make FETA in the United States and sell it in the United States, or say Australia, maybe India. And so these are the French who make money where there is an opportunity, even though they are the biggest proponent of GI protection, and certainly for champagne. So you see, the contradiction in the debate, because a lot is about money. There was a GI dispute at WTO where the very first regulation on geographic indication was attacked by Australia and the United States for violation of the principle of national treatment. And that led to a change in the EU regulation. In 2001, the Doha Declaration, beyond including a very important part for public health, also included a part for geographic indication and extended the Article 23 and 24 built-in agenda to create a registry for all GIs, and also to extend, there is more discussion about extending enhanced protection beyond wines and spirit, because countries like India, country like many Asian countries, Africa, and so on, say, well, we have very valuable GIs, but we want all countries to protect them as we are supposed now to protect wines and spirit, because we really don't produce wines and spirit, but have to protect wines and spirit, higher protection. Well, we want other countries to be obliged to protect our teas and coffees and chocolate to a higher degree of protection as well. And so this is not just a new world or world debate, it's really developing world debate and type of products debate that has been introduced in the Doha agenda as well. But everything post-Doha at the WTO is really not working, because this is one of the issue where countries can't agree. And so far we have in every CLIP council round, there's not been progresses in this negotiation. Now, some areas where we saw progresses is bilateral agreement. We saw them with the European wine agreements, and certainly geographic indication are one of the most used type of provision in FTA. The Europeans have pushed FTA with Korea. Korea is both an agreement with US and Europe, and so now if they find themselves a bit in the middle, a bit of a sandwich between, I want to protect GIs, I have to protect GIs because I have kimchi. At the same time, I need to make the Europeans happy, but I also need to make the Americans happy. So I need to figure out a way to have something that makes them both happy. Now, Europe is negotiating with Indonesia. I've been involved in some of these discussions. And the Indonesians accounted a very, very strong interest in GIs as well, wants access to European market through registration like India, but they have to deal with the generic producer of cheese, also because, again, Indonesia, like India, is really not a big producer of cheese, but their market is a big battle market because it's so large for the name manufacturer, so the European manufacturer and the generic manufacturer. China and the European Union had a agreement recently adopted. Now everything is a bit stopped because of COVID, but here we have a swap of 100 geographic indication in China, and that included many of the cheese names. And finally, the Geneva Act. The Geneva Act, as we said, creates a system that tries to merge all the existing systems. And the agreement is excellent, but has been heavily contested because it was voted only by, within WIPO, by the 30 member states, back then the 28 member states. And that created a big friction between those who were not allowed to vote. WIPO has over almost 100 members, and this was an agreement that was approved by only 28 members of WIPO because those were members of the Lisbon Agreement. And so the voting procedure created an enormous amount of debate. And even though I believe the agreement is an excellent agreement, then there is a in principle opposition to it by the Americans, by all the common law countries that were cut off of it. And so that creates a lot of friction. But if this friction succeeds, it will be obvious that this is really a good system, and hopefully can be moved forward now that it's going to be functioning, because the agreement entered into force. And so here you have some examples that can be included under the Geneva Act. So Darjeeling, of course, could. And so here you have many more products from developing countries that could benefit from it. And that if more countries become member of it, then you have a Lisbon type of registration network. So then you do one registration, boom, you will be protected in all members of the Geneva Act. And that's a huge advantages rather than have to have national registration across every single member. So this is really useful, I would say, also to reduce costs. At this point, there is no cost. There will be some registration fees, but still much less than have to register everywhere. And as mentioned, one of the real staples is that not only the states can apply, but also intergovernmental organizations as well. And so a lot has been, this agreement is really very much an hybrid between the Lisbon system and the TRIPS system. And so it really has a potential to become a global registration system and take over from what was supposed to be the WTO registration system as expanded under the Doha Declaration. Now, WTO might not like it because these two organizations cooperate but compete, but I think for the greater goods of all the users, perhaps some coordinated effect could actually happen. And so here you have the legal framework. All these slides come from the Lisbon Secretariat. Here is how the Geneva system works. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities, but it's an hybrid between a trademark registration system and an Appellation of Origin registration system. At this point, more countries join, and here you have some pictures. The act entered into effect on February 26, 2020. And several more countries are looking forward to join, as well. And so now, quickly talking about Europe, if we have a minute, and then I will not go through case studies. We can reserve that for the questions. But this is Europe. This is European Union until January. This is European Union today because the United Kingdom has officially left, even though it is still, the registration. Will be honored. So UK GIs will continue to be registered in the European Union, and the UK will implement a national system of registration like the European system. So these are the European regulation. We have a regulation for food, we have a regulation for wine, one for spirits, and one for aromatized wine. Europe has a pending regulation for handicraft that is not yet been even drafted. And so at this point, only food and beverages are protected under European law. Of course, Europeans are very strong proponent of GI protection. Here you have several slides from the European Commission. And they had many bilateral agreements. Here you can see the country that they have established agreement, and then those who are negotiating with. India, it's of course a very important partner for the European Union. So I really hope in the future we can see an agreement between these two blocs. there is two types of GIs in Europe. And here I think it's really important to understand this red dot and blue dot. The red dot, it's more a Lisbon type of protection where most of the products have to be produced in the actual region. So there should be an essential or exclusive link to the region. While under the blue dot, only one step of the process has to happen in the region. And so you see how this really makes the production much more able to be dislocated. So I can have Turrón de Gijona, which is an actual registered GI, where I can have the sugar coming from Morocco, the almond coming from Algeria, as long as they are manufactured according to specification in the region of Gijona, I can call it Turrón de Gijona. And that's one of the main issue a bit, while, here I have to do raw materials and everything should come from the region and be made from the region. And, when you start to think too many blue dots might actually not be necessarily the best for local development because they still might make more profit coming to the region. Still, a lot of the manufacturing and the ingredient don't come from the region. And so, that might not promote the region as a whole, even though sometimes, particularly with climate change and so on, we might need to be a bit more flexible. So it goes case by case. But we want to make sure these GIs don't just become marketing tools, but remain faithful symbols of local development. And here is how this GI works. So you see here, it's two types of Parmigiano Reggiano. Both are original products. So here you have the dot, the red GI logo. Then this is the collective mark of the consortium that owns the GI. They both have it. And then this is the actual brand of the two, because these are actually made by different companies and these are competitors, but they both are part of the GI consortium for this specific time. And so whether companies are whether a GI is a PDO, so a red dot, or a PGI, a blue dot, they enjoy the same protection, which is the high level of protection for all products. And so that also creates the issue. It's now the latest GIs in the past few years are mostly are PGI, blue dots, because that's easier to obtain. Because you can have, I know one of the main issues with Darjeeling was, for example, are all the plantation in the region? Are all the tea leaf come from the region? One thing is Darjeeling tea, one thing is Darjeeling blend. How can we capitalize on that? We're making sure, because then people just outside the region say, well, if they take leaves from my region and I cannot call Darjeeling, they make more money with my leaves, and that's unfair. You can see, there is good point in both these topics. So all these prosciutto style, champagne, California champagne, Gouda made in Wisconsin, these are all illegal in the European Union. Feta instead of feta, illegal. Bordeaux instead of Bordeaux, these are all evocation, imitation, lifestyle, all illegal in the European Union. Parmesan is illegal as well. Here you have, though, one of the accusations about GIs is that they are anti-competitive. So here you have 3 GIs. One is Parmigiano Reggiano, one is Grana Padano, and one is Trentino Grana. And you have 3 regions of Italy here that sell fairly equivalent product under each one of their GIs. Now, you might need to be a connoisseur of this type of hard, table cheese, but you can see you can have 3 different types of teas in each region that might be similar. So that creates, as I mentioned before, elasticity in the GI market for a certain product. How many red wine we have? We have Chianti, we have Brunello, we have Bordeaux, we have Rioja, and we have many more. And these are all GIs, but these are all competitors at the same time. And you create also GI to non-GI competition. So these are non-GI equivalent products as well. You see, they can't have the GI little dot. And this is what I call the knockoff from Australia that wants to rip off the Italians, but Israel is not Italian in any way. So this is the GI, this is the non-GI fairly equivalent, and this is the fake, you know. And so you see, this one would not be allowed in the market in Europe, because that's illegal in Europe. That would be allowed in the United States. That would be allowed in Australia. You know, the question is, should it be allowed in India if, you know, Parmesan name is allowed? But so you see, this is, you know, these are really the questions about geographic indication. And this is how you register. I'm just going to skip these and go directly here. So you can register in Europe. If you are a European product, you have to go through national stage and then European Commission stage. But if you are a Darjeeling or an Indian product, you go directly to the European Union, and then there is an application procedure, an opposition publication, and eventually the registration. And you know, there is again wine, spirit, foodstuff, and aromatized wine that can be protected. You know, the specification is very detailed. We need to identify the products, the region, the quality control body, the methods. And this is not something that we put together in one day. We need to have agronomists, we have to have scientists that really identify all the details of a well-done specification. And there are several non-EU names, as I mentioned. Some are directly registered, like Darjeeling tea. Others are protected through the FDA. At this point, there are over 3,300 GIs registered in Europe. And you can see wines, food, and spirit, Italy, France, the same that have the highest number of Lisbon registration, also have the highest number of European registration. You know, Italy has many, France has the most. Again, here, when you look at what are these registered for, again, mostly wines and spirit and, you know, other products. But then, you know, these are the databases, the Ambrosia and the DGI View. But when you look at the value of European export, that makes very clear why there is mostly wines and spirit, is because whether it's local, so European produced and sold, and export, you see the value of wines and spirit remains the #1. And so that clearly clarifies why strips have the highest protection for wines and spirit, is because there is a huge amount of economic interest in those. You know, studies have been done that certainly GI products have higher value. So there is a premium value in GI products generally, but this is mostly captured in the wines and spirit and in transformed product. It's been proven that, you know, just agricultural products, not food, agricultural products might fetch higher premium, but not all. And so when you look at, you know, basmati rice certainly has higher premium value, but you have a lot of GIs for mangoes, you know, salads and other products that are very basic agricultural products. These might not be as well paid compared to the more generic products than non-GI products. So that's also another very important point for developing countries. Careful what you do when you are wishing for more GI protection. Are you really incentivizing your economies or not? So these are all where the economists need to come in and do case-by-case studies. Usually, yes, there is a lot of advantages to GIs. There is local governance, there is self-regulation, there is, you know, there is much community cohesion. You know, the various members of the association that have to organize themselves, but at the same time, careful sometimes not to oversell the value of something that might not turn out to be as valuable as you've been selling it for. So, you know, one of the main development in the EU is the fact that they will want to, of course, cooperate more with the other organization, mostly the European Union IP Office.
So,
Yes.
Yes, Professor Irene, there are lots of questions which are have started coming. So I request you to conclude.
I'm going to close. Give me a minute and then I close.
Sure,
so here you have, several studies that have been done about the value of GIs, higher value versus generic product. And I just want to close with, there is a value of GIs beyond pure price point and products, and it's the maintaining of tradition. So we say traditional knowledge can be protected through GI, intangible cultural heritage. There is a preservation of the landscape, of the environment, the building of a community, tourism, and so this contains a very good geographic indication that has also, is against conglomeratization, but this really depends on the GI. The GI like tequila that are certainly not as in favor of small farming. That depends how the specification is drafted. But you can see the difference in landscape, and that's of course attract more tourism, and the tourism can stay in nice hotel, and then that increases the service economy. And you can increase the tourists don't just eat the cheese, they're going to drink the wine, they're going to eat the pasta, they're going to eat. And so when you do, a tour of tea in the Darjeeling region, you incentivize the economy of the region as a whole, not just of tea. And so these are really important considerations, I would say. And quality control remains crucial, because you can have a very, very good GI, but then if people start to counterfeit it or to dilute it or not respect the rules, even those inside, the community, then that cannot be allowed. And so strict control is very important. I know that's been discussed heavily in India, about what do we do when people start to disobey their own rules. Sometime when there is a top-down effect to the government that creates a GI or incentivizes a GI, and then the whole community might not understand the rules or not be used to the rules as much. And so, the prosciutto quality control goes from the pig to every single process. And now technology will make that easier. Tracing, tracking will be much easier. The food industry is using blockchain more as well. So this technology development can really help us. And finally, when GIs stop to mean what they mean, they can also be canceled. And these are some examples of European. And I'm ending here, and I'm very happy to take questions. I am going just to put these. I think that's a nice slides to have for questions. Yes.
Thank you very much, Irene. Before we take up questions, I invite Dr. Kshitij Singh also to share his view, his points, if he has some thoughts to share. Over to you, Kshitij, sir.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Irene. And if you remember, we have recently met in your IP conference.
Yes, of course.
Jakarta. So at that very crucial time, we have been able to conduct that. So it's your, firm determination, which was very much appreciated. And you have given a very, comprehensive talk about GI, covering all the facets, I think. And there are few things, I could add, or I could, just seek a kind of, response from you. The thing is that in India also, GI has been provided a very robust protection by providing two parts of registration, one for producers, the other for authorized users. And in these recent times, we have a number of GIs which have got registration here in India. So the question is, as you have mentioned, that sometimes the states are doing it just for promotion, that how many GIs we got registered. So do you think that there is something like that? Have you perceived that? And the next thing is that the potential gaps which I find, which you have also pointed out, is first of all, we have to understand the potential of GI. As someone has also asked about how can we proceed with GI, whether it is we It could be a tool for development or something. So it is, yes, it is very much a tool for development, because you might be knowing the MSME sector under the government. So GI may be a potential, you can say, tool for the communities which are doing or trading in something which is peculiar or which has something very, very distinct, that they can, if that is there, they can proceed with their registration process and they can start business. The links which are missing is like that. First thing which you have highlighted in the case of wines and other products. So there is some sort of disparity when it comes to whose product is recognized, whose product is being given or paid more heed when it comes to the enforcement and many other things. So the enforcement issue is very much a big issue that, I mean, how many stakeholders are being taken into consideration? Because just recognizing GI is not enough. That will not give you all the incentives. You need to translate it and reach out to those people who are producing that thing or using that thing. That is one of the gaps which is persisting. One of the questions which come to my mind is that because there are so many different kind of protections provided to GI kind of goods. So do you think that because of that disparity, as you see that there are two waves, one is coming from European Union and the other is coming from US and other countries. So because of that disparity, do you think that they are sometimes come in conflict, and because of that conflict, the protection of GI could be halted or something? So these are a few points which I try to make, and through your, I mean, I will encourage the students who are just hearing your lecture that they must align their discussion whenever they go through the Indian Geographical Indication Act. They must align with these very discussions for the sake of clarity. Why GI is different from appellation of origin? What are the basic distinctions? So as you know, the exclusivity, that it must be embedded in a particular region, that is one of the factors which brings that kind of distinction to appellation of origin, which has been distinctively recognized under the Lisbon Agreement. So we do have different models, but whether there is a coherence under those models or not, or how you see that it is a smooth process or there are potential conflicts in that. That would be my point, and just over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kshitij.
Yeah.
Yes, Irene, you would like to comment on Dr. Kshitij's point, or should we take up the question answer now?
No, I mean, we fully agree. We absolutely fully agree. I agree with you very much. And I think also what's interesting for me is to see the very fast development in India geographical indication landscape, because we have certainly seen many more registration in the past few years, and much more appreciation for geographical indication. And then I would say it goes down very much to a case by case. Some are very well administered, others are a bit less well administered. Then you have the accumulation between collective mark and other marks, and then the GI. And so I think what we do with all that might become a lot of law, but not necessarily. So we need to make sure it really translates in development, and enough development that is both sustainable for the community and sustainable in general in terms of trying to transform it in an export, or at least in a regional tool of development. So it does really remain a case by case in my view. Thank you.
So now we are moving to the questions which have been posed by the participants, and we have many questions, almost 8 to 10 questions we have. So I'm trying to pose questions one by one to you, Irene, and you may answer. The first few questions are from our own faculty, Dr. Jupi Gogoi. I'm just posing the questions. So what do you think are the important steps for making a GI successful post-registration? As India already has more than 361 registered GI, but except only one couple of them, others are not known. So should the focus in India right now be shifting from registering more GI to promoting and marketing it? So in a way, another question which can be clubbed with it, that where do you think India is lacking in this regard?
Well, I just want to answer you with an example. If you look at the number of GIs that are registered in Italy and France, in Italy we have, as of today, almost 1,000 GIs.
Yes.
And in France, there's almost 800.
Yes.
How many Italian GIs are actually successful and how many French GI are actually successful? I would not count more than 100 each. What do we mean for successful? One thing is Chianti wine, Scotch whiskey. So you have some GIs are certainly very successful for export, others that are more, when we do studies have been done, again, in this very mature GI market, and the vast majority of GIs are registered and they are mostly sold locally and regionally. There is a bit of that is sold internationally or even nationally. So in fact, I started to think GIs become really a governance mechanism. There is benefit in local GIs. They become a symbol of value for a community that feels more proud to have a GI. So in some way it becomes a subsidy from the government rather than giving them a prize or money, they give them the GI. But also oblige that community to organize, clean up, and the various producers to have to self-monitor and self-control. Involves more, so it becomes what the field Vivienne and myself, we wrote about this specific issue and say this really becomes a self-governance tool for complex systems. So there is a value in that too. There is a value in the little region having its GI and now having the producer organize and even sell very locally. There's never going to become a famous GI that's going to sell a lot outside. But there is a value in having the GI as a guild movement, as a bottom-up movement for that specific community to really coordinate itself in that specific region. So there is a value in that. And then there is, of course, the discourse of what products are we talking about? As I mentioned earlier, tea, you can sell it anywhere. People are going to drink tea or coffee. Goat milk or almond milk in a certain way, well, that might not be as popular. Then there also might be a saturation point of some spices from some region might be more valuable in terms of appreciation by another region. So even if India has a lot of GIs now compared to not long ago, I think after the registration, what is really important is the good marketing and good, pepper. Compot pepper was lucky to hit, the New York chefs, and so the French have been marketing the pepper tremendously, but also because they have a lot of interest in that pepper. So there is a lot of French-related financial interest. There is a lot of French working in those plantations. There is all the export and who is benefiting from the export. It's also, that supply chain too. It's really important to understand who is making the money. So I think the thing is very difficult. Each GI has its own story. Some are small and regional, and that's okay. Because they actually give a sense of belonging to that region within the region. Other become major international trade tools. Then the question is, who is making the money? It's Parmigiano Reggiano, you have the distributor all the way to Indonesia. Mostly of the money goes back to the Italian pocket. Cambodian pepper, it doesn't. From the moment he leaves the farm, where the price has gone up, all the extra money is mostly made by supply chain, which is not Cambodian. But it's still good for Cambodia to have that price that rose, because otherwise, even though they make $15 a kilo versus $5 before, and in Paris they make $100 a kilo, so you have $85 that get distributed in the chain, you still have $10 more locally. And that slowly, that country might increase its ability to do import-export as well. And so again, what can you do in India? I think, first of all, is things more strategically. I think a lot of these GIs are a bit confusing. Also, you need to think about what products. mango, how many mango are there? This is a live shell that is might be less long. And one thing is to export pepper that you can seal and it can last 1 year versus fresh produce that is much more costly and they are much more seasonal. So there is a lot of business consideration that go into that, but I don't think the approach is GI, every GI should become Darjeeling. Some GI will stay local, and that's okay. Other GIs will become regional or national. Think about national market is enormous in India already. Some might become more Asian, and some will become very international. And sometimes it's good marketing. It's a bit of luck. If you have a famous movie, with very famous actor that now suddenly visit India, and they eat something, then all the Americans suddenly want to try that something just because that famous actor Angelina Jolie is eating that product. So why not? Let's try it. So sometimes it becomes that little pool, but there again these are isolated cases of fame of products that tend to be more versatile across the world. That's not the reason why a more local GI should not be incentivized as well. So I think there is different reason for different GIs. Some of these GIs, so there's not necessarily the equation each GI should become Darjeeling. Marketing is really important, but also GIs do remain an important governance tool, in my view, to regulate a community and make it cooperate and work together. And that alone is a very important reason to have a geographic indication, I think.
Thank you. Another question we have from Dr. Chandrashen Pratap Singh from University of Lucknow. He asked that how the poor and illiterate people will be benefited when they are unaware about the technical aspect of GI. So it's a very fundamental question.
Yeah, the real issue is education. You need to know, and often, again, when you have a more top-down approach, like perhaps we still have in India, the government or the local government decides, let's incentivize this product. And so then let's create the GI. The GI is not really organized by the producer themselves, but is more organized by the technical people inside the offices and the hire consultant. And then suddenly the producer find themselves, oh, I have to change the technical standard. I didn't know. Well, but my friend next door, he doesn't have to do it. So that is, you need to educate, but you also, as law, you need to have a law that is a social norm that is vastly accepted, and you might need the time to do that. And so that's where the work comes about education. And here is where, again, it's very important to not promise to the producer, you do the GI, you obey these rules, you're going to double your profit, because it might not be the case. And so then they will be disappointed. I've done everything you said, and now look, where are my profits? And so that's where I think there is this dilemma. Should we try to push it from the top, or should we wait that it comes from the bottom? And where can we find that perfect balance? And the balance, I think, it depends on each community and each GI. Some community might be more mature, more expert. The more expert community can actually teach the less expert community about their experience. So I think that's really, it's again, a case by case about education and seminars and so on. Without making it though, I think, we academic know we have sometimes we have too much education of something that becomes where IP drives the economy rather than vice versa. IP should be a reflection of where the economy is going. So again, it is a cycle. It shouldn't be too much top down, but sometimes we need to incentivize and encourage the bottom up, through better education, but never make the point that that's a magic bullet for more profit, because it really might not be. It will be an infrastructure that does organize better community and does give a community a better sense of belonging, for sure. But then you might also have, if it's not well done, people who resent it because they got imposed criteria that they didn't agree. And so then they might boycott it. And or they might just leave, and they might have been, the very important person in that community. So I think it's where this is a very delicate balance between you want to incentivize something, but you want to have an approval is really internalized by the community, because they will be the one that are the best ambassador for their products.
Another question we have, that why certain European countries, especially France and Italy, are so successful when it comes to GI?
Well, my theory is that this country GI story doesn't start in, with the recent laws. These countries are historically for centuries known for their products. Italians have been making wine forever. And so these are really traditional products. Plus, this country had a very strong organization system through guilds. So certification guilds for the wool, for the food, really were born there. So this country have a long tradition of self-governance. Lex mercatoria come from this country too. And they had a very long tradition of self-governance by a small community that were self-regulating in a country that, was colonized, was occupied by different, but you still have the merchant having a very strong sense of regulation and community through trade. And so I think that when you combine that with very long tradition of agriculture and certain foods, then now the GI really seals a product that was there before. Maya had to change standard for safety. Now we have better marketing of it. But the story of Parmigiano Reggiano really starts many decades ago and centuries prior. And so that's where I think you really have an history and a culture. And I think that's where India, that is so rich in culture for certain products and traditional way of doing things, might also benefit from going back, rather than just import the foreign European system, and say, what will work in our trade? And how can make our trade use those concepts into this modern economy? Because sometimes it's really what your community is used to. And that, I think, is what really worked well with the system in Europe. They had a very strong tradition of self-regulation and commercial self-regulation through guilds. And from there, then you also have good products. And when you combine the two, it's very easy then to create a legal infrastructure that everybody agrees on.
Right. Now we have a question from University of Indonesia, Faculty of Law. What if there is a same product from different region in the same country? Each of the claim as the reason where the product originated. Which one will have the GI claim?
I think it really depends, because as again, if you have products that are territorial and the same name is in both regions, so the TRIPS agreement allows for homonymous GIs to be registered. The Geneva Act also allows for homonymous GIs to be registered. And basmati rice and basmati is a great example. Pakistan and India share it. Emmentaler, you have Emmentaler from Germany, Emmentaler from Switzerland, and Emmentaler from France. And so you can have the geographical localization. You have that name Indonesia. You have that name Malaysia. I know it's not what probably Indonesia want, but that's the best solution rather than have nothing. At least we have the basmati Indian. We have the Swiss Emmentaler. Then, under the Geneva Act of the Lisbon Agreement, we can have a joint GI that is owned by two countries, or we can have coexistence of nationally specified GIs. Rioja for Rioja, Spain, Rioja, Argentina. And so you can so the name is X, and then the real name is GI so-and-so Argentina, so that becomes included in that specific geography. I think that's a compromise that is the best way forward, because immigrants left, and actually I believe that some names are generic and we need to find a way to differentiate them nationally so country can all enjoy, because if the fight becomes only I can use it and you can't, the other one would say the same and we go nowhere. So if we really want to proceed have an actual improvement, we have to compromise by finding additional localizer that specify. I think batik is one of the issue in Indonesia is batik Malaysia, batik Indonesia, and even within the region, because even in Indonesia, then suddenly you have the Jogja batik versus the Bandung batik versus the Solo batik, and then now how do you differentiate? We differentiate through the specific symbols and the specific motifs. But you see, even within the country, then you have regions that might be a bit and have similar technique with differentiation, and so you create localizer within the general name. Otherwise that becomes a real issue, and I think we need to compromise. That's the only thing we can do to actually have a mutual benefit.
I think there are certain other questions, but we have taken up most of the questions and we are running short of time. So I thank you, Irene. You have wonderfully taken us through the international initiatives taken for the protection of GI, and of course, pre-trips and post-trips of both the aspect and both the comparative perspective you have given. I think all the participants have thoroughly enjoyed and enlightened from your presentation. And most of them are asking whether you could, would you like to share the PPT with them? So with your
sure, I sent you already the file. Unfortunately, since the file is so large, we have a PDF it, but please feel free. And I believe there is my email at the end. Otherwise, let me show it to the participant now.
Yes.
And, you should feel free to connect with me via email if you want. This is a...
Yes, all the participants can note down the email ID of Professor Irene. You can contact her directly if you so desire. And of course, the PPT would be shared with all of you. So thank you, Professor Irene, for sharing your valuable time coming all the way from Singapore, and of course, to my colleague, Professor Kshitij Singh also, and to all my colleague in Faculty of Law, Delhi University, Professor in charge, Dr. Aman Mittal, and the Dean and all the faculty colleagues and all the participants, especially for sparing your time in this afternoon. And of course, in Singapore, you are now in the evening, Irene. So thank you all. And it was indeed a very wonderful session. And we are going to share this. It is already live on Facebook. We are going to share it on the YouTube also. So those who have missed out can see the recorded video on the YouTube also. We'll share the link with all of you. Thank you.
My very pleasure. And, many of you are member of the IP Researcher Asia family. So I want to say hi. And we hope to also organize a series of seminars of a variety of topics, call it IPIRA Colloquium. And you stay tuned, so hopefully we can announce, we were starting at the end of June with a weekly seminar. And for now, we are waiting for this COVID-19 to become less a problem before we decide how to launch the third IPIRA. We think that it's better to wait and see for a bit. And if the situation doesn't go better until, say, September, we have decided that we are going to do the third IPIRA online. Hopefully not. We prefer to have everybody safe and, and to still keep the January, February, and maybe do a big conference online for 1 year, and then everybody meets again in 2022. But for now, we still need to decide. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you. Kshitij sir,
Thank you, Irene ma'am. And we are looking forward for other, meaningful conversation or interactions with you. And I hope that you are still working very hard. You are always engaged in something. We are also in the same boat. Doing some webinars every day. So this is a good thing in that way that because of this crisis, we are connected at least.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So we should always look at the positive side, because at that very moment when we were there in the conference which you organized, we were very positive at that moment too, to make it happen. So with that positivity, I must ensure you that you will be engaged in further interactions with us, And please guide us with your knowledge, with your expertise, and be a part of our institution. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anytime. And to everybody who is listening, stay safe, stay happy, let's stay connected, and morale should be up. We will be better soon, and just let's make the best of this time. As we said, we can do online seminars, we can take time to finish publications. There is many things that we can do to still feel useful, and our field is very important now. So I think it's really where patents and medicines and how the economy can restart and what can be used for access to food, sustainability. There is many important issues that are coming out of this time that make us think thoroughly about the importance of what we do, and what we do matters. So feel very proud of yourself and cheer up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.